What if all you had was an empty wallet and a few honest words? This is the story of how one sentence, one notebook, and one girl changed a whole community. If you've ever felt invisible, this is for you. Let's begin. My name is Anna. I remember the day so clearly. The sky was gray. My hands were cold. My stomach was empty. I stood in front of a bakery window, looking inside like a child staring at magic. Bread, warm bread, golden brown, soft steam rising. I had no money, only an empty wallet and a head full of words. Yes, words. Not the kind that you read in a book, the kind that lived inside me. Words that gave me hope. Words that my grandmother once whispered to me. She used to say, "You can be poor in your pocket, but never be poor in your words." Because words are seeds, but I was tired of seeds. I wanted bread. That morning, I checked my wallet again, like maybe a coin would magically appear. Nothing. Just silence and a little dust. I sat on a bench near the corner of the street. Next to me, a man in a business suit talked loudly on the phone. He looked powerful, confident, busy. I looked down at my shoes, old and cracked. I felt invisible. But something inside me whispered, "This is not the end. Use your words." So I opened my notebook. I didn't know what to write, but I started with one sentence. I may have an empty wallet, but I don't have an empty heart. And suddenly, I felt better. Not rich, not full, but better. Just as I was closing my notebook, the man next to me stood up. He dropped something, his coffee cup. I picked it up and handed it to him. He said thanks and smiled politely. I smiled back and added, "I hope your meeting goes well." He looked surprised. "I hope your meeting goes well." A simple sentence, but it came from my heart. He chuckled. "Thanks. I needed that." Then he paused. "Do you always carry a notebook?" I nodded. "I like words," I said. "Me too," he replied, and walked away. 10 steps later, he turned back. "Are you a writer?" I laughed. "I'm not sure. I just write." He reached into his pocket and handed me a business card. "Maybe you should send something to this magazine. We love real voices." I stared at the card. Was this real? He left. I looked down at the card again. It wasn't food, it wasn't money, but it was possibility. And sometimes that's enough to feed your spirit. That evening, I went to the library. It was warm inside, quiet, safe. I sat down and opened my notebook again. I wrote a story. A true one. About the bakery window, the cold air, the kindness of a stranger. And my grandmother's words, I titled it, "The Power of a Sentence." I typed it out, cleaned the grammar, and sent it to the email on the card. I didn't know what would happen, but I felt proud. For the first time in weeks, I walked home not feeling small. My wallet was still empty. But something else was full. My courage. 2 days later, I checked my email at the public library again. There was a reply. I clicked it with shaking hands. "Dear Anna, thank you for your beautiful piece. We would love to feature it in next month's issue. We offer a small payment of $40 for first-time writers. Please send your details." I cried right there in the library. $40. It wasn't much, but to me it was gold. It was proof. Proof that words have power. That even an empty wallet can lead to something meaningful, if you believe in your voice. I bought bread that day. Fresh, soft bread. And I remembered my grandmother again. One word can change a heart. One sentence can open a door. One story can feed a soul. From that moment, I started writing every day, not to become famous, not for money, but to speak life to myself and to others. Because I learned something. You don't need to be rich to give. Sometimes the richest gift is a kind word, a listening heart, a true story, and that is how an empty wallet taught me the greatest lesson of all. Words are never empty. They are full of possibility. I sat by the window with my bread and a cup of tea I got from a small food stall nearby. It wasn't a fancy place, just a street vendor with a rusted pot and a gentle smile. But that cup of tea, it tasted like victory. While sipping it slowly, I looked around at people rushing past me. Busy people, important people, and me, with tea, bread, and a story in a magazine. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had something valuable inside me. Not money, not position, but a voice. And that voice had just been heard. A week later, the magazine came out. It was a small column on the last page, but there it was, my name, my words. I walked to the nearest bookstore, picked up a copy, and just stared at it. The cashier noticed. "You the writer?" she asked. I nodded shyly. She smiled. "We need more stories like this." I didn't know how to answer. That night, I slept with the magazine beside me. Not because of pride, but because I finally felt seen. With the $40, I paid my phone bill and bought one more thing, a used backpack. Inside that backpack, I carried my notebook, 3 pens, a sandwich, small secondhand laptop I found at a charity shop. It wasn't much, but to me, it was a writer's kit. Not for novels, not for fame, just for truth. Because I had decided something quietly inside my heart. I may not be rich in coins, but I will become rich in words. I started writing letters, not to anyone specific, just letters filled with kindness, encouragement, and little reminders that someone cares. I left them in bus stops, under books in the library, on benches in the park, each letter signed, "From someone who believes in you." Some people call that silly. But one day as I passed the bus station, I saw a woman crying. She held one of my letters in her hands. She didn't know I had written it. She just held it tightly, as if it were a lifeline. And I knew then, a kind word can be more valuable than a coin. The library became my second home. There was one small wooden table in the corner, near the window. It became my writing desk. No one else sat there. Day by day, I came to that table with my tea and notebook. I wrote, I edited, I dreamed. One afternoon, the librarian walked over. She said, "Would you like to start a weekly writing group here? For people who feel invisible too?" My heart skipped. "Yes," I said, almost whispering. And so it began. One empty wallet, one small story, one table near a window, and now, a circle of voices learning to believe again. The writing group started. With just 3 people, one woman named Lisa, who used to be a teacher, one young man named Jay, who never finished school, and me, Anna, the girl with the backpack. We didn't know what to expect. We sat in a quiet corner, each holding a pen like it was a fragile key. At first, nobody spoke. So I said, "Let's write one sentence about something we survived." Jay wrote, "I survived being told I was useless." Lisa wrote, "I survived the silence after I lost my job." And I wrote, "I survived the hunger of doubt." We looked at each other. And we understood. This group wasn't just about writing, it was about healing. Week after week, more people came. A woman who lost her husband, a teenager who felt alone at school, an old man who just needed someone to talk to. They didn't. All write well. Some didn't even finish their sentences, but they came. They came because someone listened. And that was enough. Sometimes we forget. A story is not about perfect grammar. It's about heartbeats, and those heartbeats were now echoing in our small circle. One rainy morning, I found an envelope in my writing corner at the library. It had no name. Inside, there was a note. "I read your magazine story. It reminded me of my daughter. She gave up on herself. But I hope someone like you will remind her again one day. Thank you for being brave. Keep going." There was also $50 inside. I sat still for a long time, not because of the money, but because someone out there believed in me, and they didn't even know me. That's the power of words. We created a wall of dreams in the library corner. Just a cardboard board and sticky notes. Each person wrote one thing they still believed in. I still believe I can be loved. I still believe I can start again. I still believe my voice matters. I still believe I can forgive. I still believe I'm more than my failures. By the end of the month, the board was full. Colors of pain and courage side by side. It didn't cost a single coin, but it was rich, with life, with truth, with hope. One evening, I opened a drawer at home and found an old letter. It was from my grandmother. I had forgotten she wrote it for me before she passed. In the letter, she said, "Dear Anna, if you ever feel lost or hungry, remember, words are food for the soul. Speak gently, write bravely, and never forget, your voice is a seed. One day it will grow into something beautiful. Love always, Grandma." I held the letter close to my heart. I didn't have her anymore, but her words were still alive, and now, so was I. His name was Eli. He was only 9 years old. He came with his aunt to one of our writing sessions. She said, "He doesn't talk much, but maybe he'll listen." Eli didn't write anything for the first 3 weeks. He just sat quietly, holding a blue pencil. Then one day, he walked up to the wall of dreams. He reached up and stuck a yellow note onto the corner. It said in shaky handwriting, "I want to talk again." That was it. No one clapped. No one cried. But we all felt something shift. He showed us that even the quietest voices still have something powerful to say. Sometimes, we think success has to be big. A promotion, a diploma, a medal. But in our group, success looked different. A woman finally said, "I'm not ashamed anymore." A man who used to drink every day started writing poetry instead. A teenage girl said her story helped her stop cutting herself. No trophies, no newspapers, just little wins. But to us, those little wins were everything. Because every time someone chose words over silence, it meant life was choosing them back. One afternoon, a man from the local coffee shop visited our library corner. He said, "Would you like to hold a story night at our cafe? We'll give free drinks to anyone who shares a piece." At first, we hesitated. What if no one came? What if we forgot our words? But we said yes. We called it The Power of One Line. And that night, something magical happened. People came. Strangers, friends, curious listeners. Eli, yes, little Eli, read his first story, just 5 lines. But the room was silent, holding its breath, and when he finished, the crowd clapped softly, kindly. He looked up and smiled. After the cafe event, I received a message online. It was from an old classmate, someone who once laughed at my writing. When I was younger, she wrote, "I saw your name in the local magazine. I used to tease you, and I'm sorry. But now I follow every story you share. Your words helped me through a dark time. Please keep going." I sat with that message for a long time. It reminded me, sometimes the people who doubt you are the same ones your words will one day save. Months had passed. One morning, I opened my wallet to pay for tea, and I noticed something. It wasn't empty. There were a few coins. A folded $5 bill. A small note from someone in the group that said, "Because of your words, I didn't give up." I smiled. I used to hate that wallet. But now, it was more than a place for money. It was a symbol of the days I had nothing, and the words that gave me everything. The writing group grew slowly, not with advertisements, not with big announcements, just word of mouth. One person telling another, "You should come, it's safe." And what started as 3 people in a dusty library corner became 12, then 20, then more. Each person carried their own story. And somehow, sharing those stories didn't just heal them, it healed us all. We were building something no one could see. A bridge made of honesty. A place made of words. We came as strangers. We stayed as mirrors for each other's pain and hope. One day, I came to the library and couldn't speak. Tears kept rising up in my throat. My electricity had been cut the night before. I had eaten only 1 meal that day, and I felt like a fraud, teaching hope when I was barely surviving. Lisa noticed. She placed her notebook in front of me. It said, "You gave us your voice. Let us hold your silence." So I sat, quiet, and they wrote for me. They wrote poems, letters, and stories. They poured kindness into the space I couldn't fill. That day, I learned. You don't always have to be strong. Sometimes your strength is in letting others carry you. After that, we started something new. Each person in the group wrote a kind letter. Then, we placed the letters into envelopes with a sticker that said, "If you found this, it was meant for you." We left them everywhere. On buses, park benches, under coffee shop napkins, near schools. And we called it the kindness chain. Soon, we received emails, notes, photos, people saying, "I was having a hard day. Your words saved me." Some cried, some smiled, some wrote back to us with stories of their own, and we learned something deep. Words don't end where you write them. They travel. They find the ones who need them most. One cloudy Thursday, a woman walked into our writing group. She introduced herself as a local reporter. I heard about your cafe event, and then the letters. Would you mind if I interviewed you? I was nervous. What if I said the wrong thing? What if I didn't sound like a real writer, but... The group said, just speak from your heart. So I did. I told her the truth, how it started with an empty wallet, a kind stranger, a single story, and how words fed me when food could not. The article was published 1 week later. The title read, From Empty Pockets to Full Hearts, The Woman Who Built a City of Words. I didn't expect that, but I realized something. When your story is honest, people listen. Months after that first day, I walked past the same bakery. The bread still looked perfect in the window. But this time, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I went inside. The smell of warm dough and cinnamon filled the air. I ordered a loaf, and as I was paying, the cashier looked up and said, "You're the girl from the article, right?" I smiled. Yes, I guess I am. She leaned in and whispered, "Thank you for proving that words matter. I've started writing again. Because of you." I walked out with warm bread in my hands and a heart that felt full beyond measure. One day, I received a message from someone across the world. They had found one of our kindness chain letters in a secondhand book. It read, "You are still worthy, even on the days you feel forgotten." They wrote, "I found this by accident, but it felt like someone saw inside me. I read it every night. Thank you, whoever you are." I didn't know how that letter had traveled so far. Maybe someone left it behind. Maybe it was fate. But it showed me something important. Words don't belong to just one place. When filled with truth, they fly, and they land where they're most needed. Eli had grown. He was now 10, still quiet, but stronger. One day, the school asked if someone from the writing group could speak at their Kindness Week. Eli raised his hand. Everyone was shocked. He stood on stage in front of 200 students. He held his paper tightly, his fingers shaking. Then, in a soft but steady voice, he said, "I didn't talk for a long time, not because I had nothing to say, but because I thought no one wanted to hear me. But one day, someone gave me a pencil, and I realized my words were waiting for me." The whole room stood still. Then they clapped. Some cried. And Eli, he smiled the widest smile I'd ever seen. We outgrew our old corner at the library. So the librarian gave us something bigger, a large wooden table near the garden window. It wasn't fancy. The chairs squeaked. The fan made too much noise. But it became our place. On that table were crumbs from nervous cookies, spilled tea, and pages of raw honesty. People came to that table feeling broken. They left holding themselves a little taller. That table was never just furniture. It was a home for voices, because when a voice is heard, a life is changed. One day, a local college invited me to speak. I had never spoken in front of so many people. I almost said no, but the group said, "You've done it 100 times already, just with a pen instead of a microphone." So I stood on stage with shaking hands and a beating heart, and I told them the truth. I had nothing, just an empty wallet and a full heart. I believed I had no value, but then I wrote. I spoke, and I learned. Your words don't need permission to matter. If you're waiting for someone to give you a voice, stop. You already have one. Use it. Share it. And you'll be surprised how many lives it touches. When I finished, no one moved. Then someone stood and clapped, then another, then the whole room. And I knew. This journey was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone who ever felt invisible. One afternoon, a man stood outside the library. He looked lost. He held a broken guitar in his arms, no strings, cracked wood, and years of wear. I offered him a chair. He said his name was Marco. I used to sing, he told me, but I stopped when I lost my home, my voice. It stayed silent with the guitar. I nodded. Then I placed a notebook in front of him. Write your song, I said. He looked confused. No guitar? No problem, I smiled. Start with the lyrics. That day he wrote 3 verses, and I saw something light up in his eyes. Sometimes healing starts not with fixing what's broken, but using what you still have. It wasn't real gold, but one evening, as the sun set, golden light flooded the library windows. The group was mid-discussion. Someone was reading a poem about forgiveness. And in that moment, the light hit the walls just right. Our messy notebooks glowed. Our old chairs looked like thrones, and I thought, this is wealth. Not money, not fame, but hearts wide open, souls not hiding. The world outside rushed by. But inside, time stood still. We were rich in the only thing that ever really mattered: connection. Late one night, I received a call from Jay, the young man who once said he was useless. He had just finished his first short story collection. But he wasn't calling to celebrate. He was calling because he felt afraid. What if no one likes it? He whispered. What if I wasted my time? I told him the truth. Jay, people spend money on coffee they don't even finish. You spent hours building something that didn't exist before. That's not wasted time. That's creation. He didn't say anything, but I heard his soft breath on the other end of the line. And then he laughed. You always know what to say, he said. I smiled even though he couldn't see me. No, Jay. You already knew. I just reminded you. I still carry the same backpack. It's faded now. The zipper sticks sometimes. And the strap is starting to tear, but I don't replace it, because every stain, every scratch, tells a story of bus rides to the library, of writing in candlelight, of letters left on park benches. That backpack held more than notebooks. It carried my hope, my doubt, my strength. And I realized we don't need to wear success. We carry it quietly, in worn-out bags, in tired eyes, in whispered prayers, and that's enough. At one of our story nights, a young girl sat in the very back. She wore a hoodie that hid most of her face. She didn't speak, didn't write, didn't smile. She just watched. Week after week, she returned. Finally, one evening, as we were packing up, she slipped a note into my hand and walked away. It said, I haven't said a word in weeks, but your voice made me want to try again. Thank you for not giving up on people. Like me. There was no name, no number, but that note. It became one of my treasures, because I understood something deeper than ever before. Sometimes the people you don't even notice are the ones who are listening the closest. It was a Tuesday. The library had a fire drill. Everyone had to go outside. As we waited in the drizzle, some of the group gathered under a shared umbrella. Jay pulled out his latest short story and read it out loud, right there on the sidewalk. Cars rushed by. Rain tapped our jackets. But nobody cared. Strangers walking past slowed down. Some even stopped to listen. By the end of the story, a man clapped. Then someone else joined in. Jay turned red. But I could tell. He was proud. Even in the rain, even in the street, words can find a way to be heard. It was my birthday. I hadn't told anyone. I was planning to just show up, run the group, and head home. But when I walked into the library corner, the group stood up in silence. One by one, they each read a line from a poem they had written together. The last line said, "She gave us our words, so we gift her ours." I couldn't speak. Tears filled my eyes, not because I needed a gift, but because they saw me. And when people see you, not just look at you, but truly see you, it's one of the greatest forms of love. One day, a woman joined the group. Her name was Clara. She spoke fast. She interrupted. She talked over people. At first, it bothered everyone, even me. But then one session, we decided to each write the sentence. "What I'm really trying to say is," Clara wrote, "what I'm really trying to say is I've been ignored all my life. So now I speak quickly, before the world cuts me off again." No one said a word. That night, everything changed. Because we finally understood her voice came from pain. And suddenly, her words mattered more than ever. Sometimes, loud voices are just unheard hearts. The library janitor, an older man named Mr. Tom, always cleaned our space after hours. He never spoke much, just smiled and nodded. One night I stayed late. As I left, I noticed something taped to the library mirror. It was a note in Mr. Tom's handwriting. "I read your wall of dreams every night after cleaning. It gives me hope for my son. He's in trouble right now. But maybe one day, he'll sit at this table too." I never saw Mr. Tom the same way again, and I realized the words we plant today may grow in places we'll never see. There was a night I almost gave up. My landlord raised my rent. My part-time job cut my hours. My backpack strap snapped. And I thought, what's the point? Words can't pay bills. I sat on my cold floor and cried. Then I saw a small envelope under my door. No, name inside was a library bookmark. On it, someone had written, "Your stories changed my life. Please don't stop. You matter more than you know." It wasn't money, but it was enough to hold me together for one more day. And sometimes, that's all we need. 1 month, the library gave us permission to decorate a small window near our writing table. We called it the Window of Wishes. We filled it with handwritten notes from the group. I wish to speak my truth. I wish to heal what hurt me. I wish to become the parent I never had. I wish to forgive myself. I wish to feel seen. Soon, people who weren't even in our group started leaving their own wishes. It became a quiet, glowing space. No judgment, no noise, just dreams stuck gently to the glass. We learned even fragile wishes deserve sunlight. I got an email from the same magazine that published my first story. They said, "Your work sparked more letters than any other piece last year. Would you write another?" My hands shook as I typed my reply. I wrote about the writing group, The letters, the wall of dreams, the girl in the hoodie, the boy with the broken voice. They published it with the title, Where Words Grow. This time they paid me more. But that wasn't the part that made me proud. The proudest moment was seeing the faces of my writing group holding the printed copy and saying, "We're in a magazine." Because we all were. Together. One afternoon, I came home and the light switch worked. I blinked. The electricity was back. Someone had paid the balance, no note, no message, just a yellow sticky note on the wall. You light the world for others. So, here's some light for you. I stood still. I didn't know who it was. Maybe someone from the group. Maybe a reader. But I knew something clearly in that moment. When you give the world your truth, the world finds a way to give something back. Not always money, sometimes just grace. At one of our regular sessions, a woman walked in and stood at the edge of the room. She looked nervous. I asked gently, "Would you like to join us?" She nodded and said, "I'm Eli's mom." Everyone turned to look. She said, "I never got to thank you. Before this group, my son didn't speak. He didn't believe in himself. I thought I lost him. But now, he reads me poems. He writes notes on the fridge. He's alive again." She handed me a photo of Eli standing on a small stage at school, holding a trophy. Best Young Speaker. I placed the photo on our writing table, not as a decoration, but as a reminder that words are not just tools. They're medicine. One winter evening, the power went out in the library during our session. Darkness covered everything. I pulled a candle from my backpack, one I carried just in case. I lit it and placed it in the middle of the table, and one. By one, people opened their notebooks. They read by candlelight, their voices soft but clear. Outside, the city buzzed with noise, but inside, peace. Afterward, Lisa said, "That candle felt like you, Anna. Always quiet, always shining." I didn't answer. I just smiled, because I knew I was no longer alone. We were all candles now, lighting each other through the dark. I never meant to write a book, but over time the group kept saying, "You should put all these stories in one place." At first I said no. Who would read it? I wasn't famous, I wasn't special, but they insisted. So I gathered the poems, the short letters, the reflections from cold nights and rain-drenched benches. I typed it all on that secondhand laptop, slowly, gently, honestly. I called it Letters from a Library Table. We printed 50 copies, simple paper, no hard covers, just stories. We sold them at a local market stall. Each one came with a handwritten thank you card. They sold out in a week. At one book reading event, a young girl stood in line with her hoodie pulled over her head. When it was her turn, she handed me a copy of the book and said, "Can you sign it for me?" I smiled. "Of course. What's your name?" She hesitated, then pulled her hood back. There was a long scar across her cheek. She whispered, "I used to hide this, but your story about the girl in the back row, it helped me come forward." I looked into her eyes and said, "You're not hiding anymore. You're here." She nodded, and I signed the book. To the girl who stepped into the light, our little wall of dreams had been filling up for months. Hundreds of sticky notes, some curling at the edges, but still holding on. The library announced they wanted to create a permanent art piece from it. We held a celebration. Each note was carefully laminated and added to a large mural by a local artist. It was installed at the library entrance. Now, when people walk in, the first thing they see isn't shelves or silence. They see hope hanging right in front of them, dreams made visible, because sometimes people just need to know their wish matters, even if it's written in pencil. One day, I received an invitation. A large city was hosting a national literacy event. They wanted someone to speak about community storytelling, and someone had sent them my magazine piece. I read the letter twice to be sure. They were inviting me. Me, Anna, the girl with the empty wallet, the notebook, the backpack, the broken umbrella. I packed one good dress, a pen, and a copy of our little book. When I arrived, I saw thousands of people, and I thought, not bad. For a girl who once stared at bread through a window. When it was my turn on stage, I looked out at the crowd. Bright lights, big screen, a microphone that made my voice louder than I'd ever heard it, and yet, I didn't feel afraid. I told them everything: the bench, the letter, the boy who never spoke, the scar, the candle. I ended with this. I started with nothing in my hands, just an empty wallet and a heart full of doubt, but I had words, and they found me. If you feel invisible, write, speak, whisper if you must, because one sentence can hold a soul together, and that is more powerful than gold. The room stood, and I knew my voice had made its way home. People started asking, "What do you call this group?" We had never given it a name. It wasn't a club. It wasn't a class. It was just a space, a table, a feeling. One day, Lisa said, "Why don't we call it the listening room? Because that's what it really is." So we did. Not officially, just quietly. We put a little handmade sign on the table. Welcome to the listening room. Bring your silence, your story, or both. That was us. No big banners, just big hearts. After the event, I sat in a quiet hotel room with a view of the city lights, and I wrote a letter, not for the newspaper, not for a reader, just for the girl I used to be. Dear younger me, I know you're tired. I know you're hungry. I know you feel forgotten, but you're about to find something beautiful. A stranger's smile. A page filled with your truth. A tiny notebook that saves your life. You don't need to be louder, just braver. Keep writing. The world is listening, even when it seems like it's not. I folded the letter and slipped it into my journal. Maybe one day someone else will read it. At a local youth center, I was invited to speak. After my talk, a young man waited until everyone else had left. Then he walked up, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "I don't know if I belong here," he said, tears in his eyes. He showed me his writing. It was rough, messy, full of raw pain. But it was real. I told him, "This isn't about perfect words. It's about real ones, and you just gave the world something true." He nodded, then whispered, "That's the first time anyone's ever said that to me." And I knew that moment would stay with him forever. People began asking how to support the group. We started gathering secondhand backpacks. We filled them with a notebook, a pen, a small candle, a copy of letters from a library table. We gave them out at shelters, schools, and clinics. We called them starter stories. Because sometimes, all someone needs is a place to begin. No one taught us this. We didn't have a manual. We just followed the thread of kindness, and it kept leading us to new places. One rainy evening, I stayed behind at the library to clean up. As I left, I noticed a small package near the front door. It was wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a wallet, old. Leather, empty, but inside was a note. I found this in a drawer today. It reminded me of your story. I used to feel empty too, but your words filled me again. Thank you for proving that even the broken things still hold value. I placed the wallet on our writing table, next to the candle, next to the old pen jar, and I whispered, "You're home now." One rainy morning, a new face walked into the library. She had soft eyes, graying hair, and held a folder close to her chest. "I used to teach here," she said, "before I got sick." She joined the group, sat quietly for 2 weeks, then finally read something. Story titled, "When the Chalk Fell." It was about the moment she dropped a piece of chalk mid-lesson and realized she couldn't teach anymore. She said, "But now I think maybe I was still meant to teach, just not with chalk." That day, she brought lessons none of us expected, because, she reminded us, your calling doesn't disappear. It just sometimes changes shape. We hosted an open mic night. The library offered the whole back room. We expected 30 people. Over 100 came. People stood in the aisles. Some sat on the floor. They came with folded papers, nervous hands, and shaking voices. But each one spoke. A poem, a letter, a journal entry, a goodbye, a beginning. A secret. When the final person read, the room clapped softly, then stood. The librarian whispered, "I've never seen it this full." I looked around at the crowd and thought, this is what fullness looks like. Not silence broken, but silence. Honored. A woman came to our table one day and said, "I can't read, but I have stories." We welcomed her in. She spoke and I wrote. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "I remember things people try to forget," she said, "but I want to tell them anyway." She shared her life like puzzle pieces, painful, bright, true. And when I read her story back to her out loud, she closed her eyes and whispered, "That's me. I didn't know I could live on paper." And we learned. A writer is not someone who knows the rules. A writer is someone with something to say. Someone left a small note tucked into a book in our library corner. It simply said, "I was going to end my life last year. Then I found one of your letters. I kept it. I still read it every day. I'm still here. Thank you." No name. Just those words. We placed the note in a small glass frame on our writing table. It sat beside a new candle and a vase of wildflowers. Someone brought from home, and we realized we'll never know all the lives our words touch. But that's okay. Because we don't write to be famous. We write to reach hearts. At a national storytelling event, I was asked to speak again. This time, I brought someone with me. Jay. He stood on stage, trembling, but he looked into the crowd and said, "I came from silence. I used to believe words belonged to smart people, rich people, confident people. But then I met a girl with an old backpack, and she said, 'Try one sentence.' So I did, and it changed my life." He stepped back. The room gave him a standing ovation, and I stood quietly in the corner, smiling through tears, because I didn't need to speak that night. My words had already spoken. Through him one evening, I called the group together, not because we were ending, but because I wanted to thank them. I baked small loaves of bread, just like the ones I once couldn't afford. Lisa brought tea. Jay brought old photos from our early sessions. Eli, now almost 12, wrote a group poem that made everyone cry. We didn't read long stories that night. We shared memories. Someone said, "This group saved my life." Another said, "It gave mine back meaning." And I said simply, "Thank you for letting me speak, even when my voice trembled." I returned to the place where it all began, the bench by the bakery, the cold sidewalk, the place where I once sat with an empty wallet and no idea what would come next. It looked the same, but I didn't. I sat down again, closed my eyes, and I whispered, "You were scared. You were hungry. But you showed up anyway. Thank you for not giving up." Then I pulled a pen from my bag and wrote a short message on the back of a bookmark. This bench gave me my beginning. Maybe it can give you yours too. I left it there. For someone else. A young woman named Zara joined our group. She reminded me of myself, quiet, unsure, but full of light. She asked me one day, "Do you think I could lead a session?" I smiled and said, "You already are." Weeks passed. I stepped back more. She stepped forward. She brought new ideas, fresh energy, gentle leadership. And I realized something. I didn't have to hold the light forever. I just had to pass the candle. And Zara, she lit up the room in her own way. My old notebook, the one I had carried for years, was nearly full. On the last page, I wrote, "I once thought having nothing made me empty, but now I know. Having words, love, and courage. That's everything." If you're holding this notebook someday, know this. Your voice matters, even if it shakes, even if no one claps. Even if you're writing from hunger, write anyway, because the world doesn't just need louder voices, it needs true ones. I closed the book, not because the story was over, but because a new one was ready to begin. Years passed, the group still met. New people came. The wall of dreams grew taller. The library turned our table into a permanent writing corner with a sign, "The Listening Room, where every voice belongs." One day, a teacher contacted me. She was creating a program for young writers. She asked if she could name it after my first story. And so, the power of a sentence became a real space, a classroom, a sanctuary. I stood in the back of the opening ceremony. I didn't give a speech. I just watched. And in that moment, I knew. I started with an empty wallet, but I leave with something no one can take. A story that reached hearts. A table that gave people back their names. And a voice that kept whispering. One word can change a moment. One sentence can save a soul. One story can light the dark. We often wait for big things to change our lives. Money, success, attention. But sometimes all it takes is a voice. A quiet one. A broken one. A true one. If this story touched you, share it, because the power of words only grows when we pass them on.